How Ukraine War Became Game of Thrones. Russia's war in Ukraine began on the 24th of February 2022. On this day, President Vladimir Putin ordered his military forces into the former Soviet Republic. In a televised address aimed at a global audience, Putin announced that Russia was launching a special military operation to defend the Russian-speaking regions in eastern Ukraine, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, which he had unilaterally recognized as independent states a day earlier, under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. He claimed without proof that Zelensky's government had been committing acts of genocide against Russian speakers in the region and that they were neo-Nazis whose actions were controlled by Brussels and Washington. He also alleged that Kyiv was developing nuclear weapons and that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was building military infrastructure in Ukraine, threatening the very existence of the Russian state. Putin said Russia was acting within her rights of self-defense with the goal of demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine. He threatened to deal severely with any nation that would intervene to save Kyiv in the course of the special military operation. This declaration of war did not come as a surprise. As a matter of fact, it was expected because months prior, the Kremlin commander-in-chief had amassed over 150,000 troops on the Russia-Ukraine border. This military buildup sparked fears of an imminent invasion with outcry from Ukraine, the United States, Europe and other United Nations member states. Several top-level meetings were held between US and Russian delegations, in a bid to pacify and also warn the Russian president of the grave consequences of invading a sovereign nation. President Putin at the time denied he had any plans of invading his neighbor, calling the fears of Ukraine and Western nations unfounded. But on the 24th of February, 2022, he could hide his intentions no further as his forces breached the Ukrainian border hours after the address. Their mission was to capture Kyiv in 3 days or less. This mandate was given by Putin because of Russia's intelligence assessment of the country's military as weak, undermanned, fully armed and incapable of fighting against a military power like Russia. The intelligence assessment turned out to be erroneous because Ukraine's military was armed to the teeth and very ready to fight. A 3-day mission soon stretched into months as both militaries locked horns, with casualties, both human and machinery mounting on both sides. Fearing heavy loss of Russian military personnel for no tangible gains, the Kremlin boss pulled his forces from Kyiv and sent them to the east of the country. Game of Thrones, on the other hand, is an American television series created by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss for Home Box Office, an American premium cable and streaming service. This fine work of fiction was based on adaptation of A Song of Ice and Fire, a series of fantasy novels written by George Martin. The series ran on HBO for 8 years, premiering in the United States on April 17, 2011 and concluding on May 19, 2019. It had 73 episodes embedded into 8 seasons. The series had 3 major plots. The first was the brutal power struggle for control of the Iron Throne of the 7 Kingdoms of Westeros through political maneuver, warfare and scheming among the noble families. The second plot focused on the last descendant of the realm's deposed ruling dynasty who had been exiled to Essos and was plotting to return and reclaim the throne. The third followed the Night Watch, a military order defending the realm against the threat of the White Walkers, a supernatural enemy from the far north, that threatened to bring a permanent winter to the land. Game of Thrones attracted a record viewership and was dubbed one of the greatest television series of all time by critics. The series received 59 Primetime Emmy Awards, the most by a drama series, including Outstanding Drama Series in 2015, 2016, 2018 and 2019. It also won other awards and nominations including 3 Hugo Awards for Best Dramatic Presentation, a Peabody Award, and 5 nominations for the Golden Globe Award for Best Television Series. Now, how does Ukraine war mirror the Game of Thrones? The answer is very simple. Just as the noble families fought themselves to claim the Iron Throne in the blockbuster series, every participating country in the Ukraine war are doing so for the personal interest. Russia, Ukraine, the United States, Europe and other countries all have personal interest which they hope to protect through the Ukraine war. Now this brings the question, what does Vladimir Putin want in Ukraine? Russia has three major war goals in Ukraine. First, Putin wants to restore Russia's superpower status. Just as Daenerys Targaryen was plotting to reclaim the Iron Throne, so also Putin is plotting to reclaim Russia's lost superpower status. The Soviet Union became a superpower in the aftermath of World War II. By 1945 it had the world's largest army, massive industrial capacity, a large population and control over Eastern Europe, which made it one of the two dominant global powers alongside the United States. The development of its own nuclear weapon in 1949 helped in cementing her position as a superpower and arch-rival of the United States. But on the 26th of December 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved into 15 states after so much internal crisis which lasted for almost a decade. Russia immediately stepped into the shoes of the USSR. It took over her seat at the United Nations, inherited her massive debts, took ownership of her nuclear weapons and became leader of the Commonwealth of Independent States. During this time Russia was economically and militarily very weak. The United States became the sole superpower in the world. Seeing Russia as a failed state and too weak to be termed an adversary, she and her allies switched over to fighting terrorism all over the world. Over the past 3 decades, Russian leaders, especially Vladimir Putin, have been very busy rebuilding Russia economically and militarily to be on par with Washington. But he has not been successful in restoring her title of superpower because the world recognizes only one, which is the United States. So Putin decided to launch this war to announce to the world that Russia is now a superpower by force. Another of Moscow's war goal is to forcefully stop the expansion of NATO eastwards. Over the decades, NATO has been admitting nations under Russia's sphere of influence into the military alliance. In 1999 NATO granted membership to Czech Republic, Hungary and Poland. In 2004 it admitted Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia and 3 former Soviet states, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. In 2009 it added Albania and Croatia into the fold. Montenegro joined in 2017, North Macedonia in 2020 and then Finland and Sweden in 2023. Now Ukraine is fighting tooth and nail to join the alliance. In Putin's thinking, if Ukraine's ascension into NATO is not halted by force, Georgia will soon follow suit and so will other Soviet republics like Armenia, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and even Belarus. So Putin is using Ukraine war as a medium through which NATO's expansionist drive will come to an end in Eastern Europe, while also passing a strong message to former Soviet republics to shelve their ambitions of joining the military bloc or face Russia's wrath. Thirdly, Putin wants to test the military might of NATO. He wants to wage hybrid warfare against the organization in a foreign soil, and Ukraine happens to be the best location for that. He intends to prove to the world that Russian weapons are superior to those of the West. Since the war began in 2022, NATO member states has been stepping up military support for the war-torn country. First they bought and delivered Soviet-era military equipments like infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, self-propelled howitzers and MiG-29 jets to Kyiv to use against Russian forces. When Putin's forces destroyed those military gears, NATO countries sent Abrams, Challenger and Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Putin said those deliveries were an escalation and has made NATO a party to the war. He threatened severe consequences but in the end did nothing. Pushing the red line further, the Netherlands, Poland and other countries sent F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine to help her fight off Russian aerial threats. The Russian president threatened fire and brimstone but again did nothing. The United Kingdom, France and Germany raised the bar even further by sending heavier equipments like NASAMS, Patriots, HIMARS and Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. These systems have provided Ukraine with significant tactical advantages, enhancing its ability to counter Russian armored advances, aerial threats, and conduct precision strikes deep inside Russia. Still, Putin has done nothing more than mere rhetorics, calling NATO's actions an escalation and tagging the organization a party to the war. Now President Zelensky is negotiating with Donald Trump to lay hands on U.S. Tomahawk missiles for use against Russian forces. Though President Trump has turned down his request, Putin will do nothing even if Trump changes his mind. This is not because he lacks the capacity to retaliate against NATO. He is keeping his cool because he is enjoying the ride. He is giving the world a spectacle of Russian and NATO military systems, believing Russian weapons are faring better. If there is one thing Putin has said about the Ukraine war that remains true, it is that NATO's military assistance to Ukraine will not change the outcome of the war, and truthfully it hasn't. Now to Ukraine, what does it hope to achieve from this war? Kyiv's war goal is to maintain her sovereignty and break free of Russian influence. All through the days of the Soviet Union, Russia has always had the spotlight as the flag bearer, while Ukraine came second in terms of importance due to its massive agricultural and industrial output and large population, which was very crucial for the Soviet economy. When the USSR disbanded, Ukraine became an independent nation once again and began the painstaking journey of building the nation from ashes. But its leaders made a great blunder. They foot-dragged about joining NATO while former Soviet republics like Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania were doing so at a time when Russia was dealing with internal issues. The resultant effect of the delay is a resurgent and aggressive Russia not ready to cede her influence over Ukraine or other Soviet states. So for Ukraine to become truly independent, it must force Moscow's hand militarily. In the Soviet era, Ukraine was very pivotal to her strength. Most of the scientists who built the country's nuclear weapons were from Ukraine. Many of the nuclear infrastructures and weapons were stationed in Ukraine as well. Ukrainians were prominently featured among the military commanders and high command under Soviet rule. Hundreds of Ukrainians served as generals, and several of them attained the rank of Marshal of the Soviet Union, the highest military rank. In terms of administration, Ukrainians were well represented in the Communist Party, with Nikita Khrushchev and Leonid Brezhnev even serving as General Secretary. So since independence, Ukraine has seen Russia as peer. Its leaders have had the belief it could stand its ground against Russia when push came to shove. And so since 2014, Europe's second largest country has been preparing militarily to confront Mother Russia, knowing fully well her EU and NATO aspirations will not come without a price. The war has been on for over 3 years now, and Ukraine with help from her Western partners have been doing a great job at fending off Putin's forces. As peace plans are put forward to end the war and negotiations intensifies, Ukraine hopes to wane herself of Russia's influence and decide her future without outside interference. European nations like France, Germany, United Kingdom, Poland and others have their own motive for supporting Ukraine against Russia. Their core interest is ensuring their own security. Many Western nations lived in perpetual fear of their powerful and brutal neighbor during the Cold War. Many nations that joined the Warsaw Pact when it was founded in 1955 did so to be on the good side of the USSR, while those that joined NATO at the time did so to avoid being invaded by the giant neighbor. When the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a sigh of relief among European countries because the threat to their security had been halted. They quickly began to join the military umbrella of NATO to guarantee their security while embarking on industrialization to create wealth and prosperity. There was peace for a long time in Europe, except for tiny skirmishes, till Putin's forces marched on Ukraine, marking the first time one European nation breached the borders of another after World War II. What makes matters worse is that Ukraine is much larger than many of her backers in terms of landmass. If Russia were to invade her successfully, stealing her lands and plundering her resources, Putin would be emboldened to take his adventure to other nations outside Ukraine's borders. So Western nations are therefore eager to back Ukraine so as to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia and keep their security and unity intact. The war goal of the United States differs significantly from those of Ukraine and Europe. Hers is to stop the rise of Russia to superpower status. Russia is by far the richest country in the world in terms of natural resources. Her vast natural resources are estimated to be worth around $75 trillion according to 2021 data. Some estimates place the value even higher, with one figure from late 2024 suggesting $100 trillion, nearly double that of Washington. Russia has huge reserves of oil, natural gas, coal, gold, timber and rare earth metals. It is a very industrialized and technologically advanced nation. And what's more, it has the ambition of wearing the superpower crown of the Soviet Union to challenge the hegemony of the United States. To remain the most influential nation on Earth, the White House must do something very drastic. It must bring Russia to her knees by destroying her economically and militarily. How can this be achieved? The answer lies somewhere in the Cold War books. The US defeated the Soviet Union during the Cold War through a multifaceted strategy which included economic pressure by bleeding Soviet resources, military containment through NATO and arms race, promoting democratic capitalism as superior, strong alliances, and an ideological war showcasing Western freedoms versus Soviet oppression, ultimately exhausting the Soviet system until it collapsed. Internally, key tactics applied were the Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan, NATO and supporting the anti-communist movements, all while maintaining nuclear deterrence. Joseph Biden applied some of these pressures during his time in office. He together with leaders in Brussels imposed severe economic sanctions on Russia. Russia was thrown out of SWIFT, her energy was denied access to international markets, the West stopped buying her oil or in some cases placed a price cap on her energy products. Moscow was isolated diplomatically and arrest warrants placed on Putin and key members of his inner circle. Assets worth $300 billion belonging to the Kremlin was frozen while many oligarchs from the Federation were forced to sell their companies all over Europe. The result was very devastating and the ruble crashed while the economy contracted. Those sanctions, though crippling, did not bring Putin's war machine to a halt, because Moscow fought back like a wounded lion by introducing drastic measures to shore up her economy. First, by forcing her trading partners to pay for her energy in rubles, thereby strengthening the local currency. Secondly, shifting her trade to Asia and selling her oil at heavily discounted price to China and India. And thirdly, by taking over exiting European businesses while encouraging Chinese investors to come into the country. The result of the economic war was a stalemate. President Donald Trump, instead of following in Biden's footsteps by tightening existing sanctions or adding more, has decided to fulfill his campaign promise of ending the Ukraine war. He has presented a 20-point peace plan heavily tilted in Putin's favor. His national security strategy recently published shows that he is more interested in warm relations with Moscow to gain access to Russia's energy and rare earth metals than her capitulation, which Brussels crave for to ensure European security. This foreign policy U-turn has created a rift in US-Europe relations while emboldening Vladimir Putin. Now what does the rest of the world want to achieve by supporting Ukraine against Russia? Aside from the United States and few European countries who see Russia as a threat that must be eliminated, there are many nations currently contributing to Ukraine's war efforts. These countries include Canada, Ireland, Israel, Austria, Australia, Azerbaijan, New Zealand, Morocco, South Korea, Japan and very many others. Their core interest in backing up Ukraine against Putin's aggression is to ensure that the rules-based order is maintained. The rules-based international order is the post-World War II system of laws, norms, institutions like the United Nations and World Trade Organization, and agreements that govern how countries interact, aiming for peace, stability, fairness and predictable relations through cooperation rather than force. It's built on principles of national sovereignty, free trade, human rights and multilateralism. It was established largely by the US and its allies to prevent future wars. By marching on Ukraine without justification, Russia is challenging this order and causing chaos in the international community. The world has to act to stop Putin from redrawing international boundaries by force. The combined efforts of Ukraine, Europe, the United States and the international community has really paid off. It is estimated that every day of the war cost Russia about $500 million to $1 billion. From 2022 to 2025, Putin has lost over $450 billion in war revenue. The economic growth of the country is slowing significantly due to war demands, labor shortages and high interest rates. Civilian industries are struggling with rising inflation risks and reliance on China for vital imports, especially machine tools, thereby straining the budget. The Game of Thrones may have come and gone, but its reality plays before our very eyes in Ukraine. The world watches in silence as thousands of innocent Ukrainians and Russians are slaughtered on a daily basis in and around the battlefield, while hardliners from participating countries refuse to find common ground to end the war. We watch in horror as Donald Trump betrays and throws close allies under the bus just to get warmer relations with Moscow. Vladimir Putin, a wanted criminal, is given presidential welcome in Anchorage, Alaska, while Zelensky, Macron, Keir Starmer and Friedrich Merz have to beg Trump for attention and inclusion into negotiations to end a war raging on in their home continent. We can term Ukraine Game of Thrones reality and continental Europe, Westeros. We can conveniently call President Zelensky Tyrion Lannister, an extremely cunning, witty and intelligent dwarf who uses his sharp mind, wide knowledge and diplomatic skills to outmaneuver foes and survive treacherous situations. Zelensky fits this role well because of his ability to compel Europe, America and other world leaders to offer continued support to his country while refusing their request to cede land to Vladimir Putin, a key Russian demand to end the war. Putin can be likened to two characters in the series, first as Daenerys Targaryen, also known as Dany Daenerys, Stormborn or Mother of Dragons. This central character made alliances, built armies including the Unsullied, and freed slaves across Essos as she sought to reclaim the Iron Throne of Westeros, her family's ancestral seat. In the same vein, the Russian #1 citizen has built alliances with China, India, Iran and North Korea, which has helped the country to circumvent economic sanctions. He has also built a large army and has killed hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians, just as Daenerys Targaryen did when she burnt down King's Landing. Secondly, Vladimir Putin can be likened to the Night King, the leader of the White Walkers. This evil character and his army of undead whites unleashed terror on Westeros, aiming to bring an endless winter and extinguish all life and memory by killing the Three-Eye Raven. Similarly, Putin has become a threat to Europe. His invasion of Ukraine and refusal to end the war is causing panic in many European capitals. Many EU leaders are of the opinion his conquest will go beyond Kyiv. Daenerys Targaryen and the Night King were both killed in the series. But Putin will not be killed. He will be defeated by the one playing Jon Snow, the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is in a warm romance with his Russian counterpart right now, much to the anger of his European allies. He is doing so because he wants something that will make America very rich. Once he lays his hands on the prize, he will dump Putin and return to the Cold War doctrine. When that time comes, Russia will implode just like the Soviet Union. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do like, comment and share it. Also remember to subscribe to Niger on the Move channel for more incredible update on Ukraine war. See you in our next video.